I want to do this a little differently than the way we normally start. But I will note for you that already in the time of the Talmud, the rabbis, and specifically Rabbi Yochanan in Masechet Gittin calls this chapter 22 through 24, the entire storyline about Bilam. He calls it the Book of Bilam, and she talks about it as an independent work, right? There are one of the models by which the Torah is perceived in the rabbinic literature is that the Torah is made up of separate small little scrolls, and that part of what Moshe does at the end is puts it all together and puts it in order, right? And so the rabbis looked at this and said, this is its own little literary unit, if you will, and in many ways, as you yourself noted, Sam, does not feel that connected to what comes before and what comes after.
Right.
In fact, just to highlight that, let me find the beginning of chapter 25. If I were to read you the following, the Israelites then marched on and encamped in the steppes of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women. Right? It flows seamlessly. Why? Because we're dealing with Moab in both cases. Right? And in fact, as experienced by the Israelites, that is what happens next, because nothing that happens in chapter 22 through 24 is something about which the Israelites are even aware, right? There's no one in Israel who can, in fact, attest to this, because Bilam is doing it from some mountaintop
across the Jordan,
overlooking the Israelite camp, but he's not sending a readout of his message to the Israelites. Right. It's just there, right? So looking at this as a separate unit is easy from that perspective. Plus, if we read it, we realize that the narrative is also an amalgam in some ways, because it feels contradictory
within itself.
All right. No. So we're going to read, and I'll stop and I'll highlight that, and then we'll sort of circle back to the whole book, the whole section. Okay. Balak, the son of Tzipor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Right. It's a reference to the conquest of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, right? And then it goes on, Moab was alarmed. Now, do we know who Balak is after verse 1? No, we don't, right? Moab was alarmed because the people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this horde will lick clean all that is about us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. Right? And we're left sort of with the question of, why are the Moabites talking to the elders of Midian?
Right.
Right. And then it says, Balak, the son of Tzipor, who was king of Moab at that time, oh, now we know who he is, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Peor and Petor, which is by the Euphrates in the land of his kinsfolk, to invite him, saying, there is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view when it is settled next to me. He wants to hire Bilam. Did they tell us anything about Bilam? No, because Bilam is a known commodity, at least to them, not necessarily to us.
But we know where he's from or his father's
Well,
from, right?
that may actually be not correct,
Okay.
because he travels for 3 days to get to where the king of Balak wants him. King Balak wants him. You don't make the trip from Mesopotamia to the steppes of Moab in 3 days. Well, at least not by the means of travel that they would have had back then.
Didn't have a fast camel.
No.
No camels at all.
Or maybe they did have a fast camel, but a fast camel is like saying, a fast snail.
Tender.
It's relative.
Subway, they went.
Okay, so, but it's clear that there's this panic mode, right? And he says, "Come then, put a curse upon these people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed indeed." Right? Very, very straightforward. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian. Okay. Who's now traveling? The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian. Right. Before we're going, why is Moab talking to the elders of Midian? Right. You're beginning to see little hints that we have a story that probably involved Moabites originally or Midianites originally that sort of got fused together, because Midian was a confederation of peoples who dwelt within Moabite territory. So, and it seems that this confederation of peoples who shared the land took turns being king. So Balak was king of the was king of the Moabites at that time. It wasn't this hereditary succession, but rather sort of a rotation amongst these groups.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
At the top of, for me, it's top of 895. They are too numerous for me. When we talk about the children of Egypt, and in Egypt, they're talking about the Jewish people, they're talking about they're too numerous in number.
Yes.
Now, is numerous just the general word that's used all the time? We talk about a large group of people.
Numerous here means there's a lot.
Well, I figured that, but that's the word that's just common at the time. Numerous. Because we would say that today, we just say a large group of people.
From this perspective, you have to look at it through the prism of the perceiver, because the term used here by Balak and the term used in chapter 1 of Exodus, when the Egyptians are looking at this growing population of Israelites, is the same term, which doesn't appear very often, but it's a part of an idiom that reflects on being scared because of the size, because of the numbers. It's today we might use instead of numerous, we might use something like a horde, or something that suggests a degree of fear.
Okay.
When they talked about the Mongol hordes, there was this fear of being overrun by them.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's animals, right? Do you use horde for people?
They did it for the Mongols, so I guess you could. Yeah.
But you're right, usually do with animals, yeah.
Now, remember, the image here is they are going to literally lap up everything and devour everything. So yes, it's sort of an animalistic image, because of this devastation that they would bring. Okay. So the elders show up. Oh, yes, Rhoda.
I just had a question. When you were talking about they were not following hereditary leaders, but they had changed by rotation, was that the Israelites or the Moabites?
The Moabites.
Thank you. I had it right. Thank you.
Right, so the Midianites and the elders of Moab and Midian, who are versed in divination, we'll come back to divination in a moment, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, "Spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as the Lord may instruct me." So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. I guess the Midianite dignitaries stayed in a hotel somewhere. God came to Balaam and said, "What do these people want of you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is the people that came out from Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off." But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed." Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord will not let me go with you." Okay, what does he not tell them? The why,
Yeah, I can't.
right? God said, "No, I can't go with you." But God said a little bit more than that, which becomes relevant later in the story. The Moabite dignitaries left, and they came to Balak and said, "Balaam refused to come with us."
Twist.
All right, they've changed the narrative. Not that, they don't quote Balaam as saying God said no, or God didn't give permission. It was Balaam refused to come with us, which triggers Balak to send the next delegation. So he sent other dignitaries, more numerous and distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak, the son of Zippor, please do not refuse to come to me. I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and damn this people for me." Balaam replied to Balak's officials, "Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything big or little contrary to the command of the Lord my God." Okay, so far Balaam sounding okay. "So you too stay here overnight and let me find out what else the Lord may say to me." Why does he need to go through this again? Think about that for a moment. That night, God came to Balaam and said to him, "If these men have come to invite you, you may go with them, but whatever I command you, that you shall do." Right? So we do have a change. God gives permission with a caveat, which is not radically different than what was previous.
So why did God change?
Wait.
I'm sorry.
We'll come back to that in a second. When he arose in the morning, Balaam saddled his ass and departed with the Moabite dignitaries, but God was incensed at his going. So an angel of the Lord placed himself in his way as an adversary. And then we get the whole talking ass story, which we're going to do, but I want to stop here for a second. Do you not notice something odd between verse 20 and verse 22?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like in verse 20, God says, "Okay, you may go, caveat, just do what I tell you." Right? Which is really an echo of what Bilam already had said. Like, I can only do whatever God says I can do. It doesn't matter how much you offer me. Right? So why is God incensed with Bilam that he's going? Okay. So we'll pause here in our dramatic story, and let's talk a little bit about magic, because that's the backdrop to understanding our story here. Magic exists in two categories in the ancient world, probably in the modern world too, but I don't think they ever had, David Copperfield in mind or whoever you would like to plug in here. Okay, two categories. You had sorcery and divination. Divination was an attempt to predict the future, to know what was going to happen. Sorcery was an attempt to alter the future.
Is divination like divine intervention?
No, divination in this sense means divining what the gods have are going to do or have decreed will happen. The Torah bans sorcery outright, and it is punishable by death. Right? In Mesopotamian law, and in Hebrew it's called kishafim. In Mesopotamian law, it's kishpu. And there too, it's a capital crime. It was a form of black magic where you hexed an individual. It was considered to be antisocial behavior. And the negative aspects of sorcery were punished severely. But sorcery was also seen as having a legitimate place in Mesopotamian society, with the purpose being to counter the effects of black magic. So you had shurpu or maglu, which were terms that referred to people or the activity of undoing the bad stuff that someone who ought not have been doing the bad stuff did, or it was a form of exorcising demons. Okay? By the way, if this sounds a little bit like an echo of last week's talk about the red cow and the ashes of lustration, et cetera, yes, because it's all connected. Okay, yeah.
I was thinking of one, you're going back to Moses and the rod. For Pharaoh, is that a form of, because it gives you a sense of legitimacy? And is sorcery to some extent give you legitimacy?
Certainly in ancient Egypt, sorcerers and the king's magicians were a known entity. So for for God's messenger to be recognized, quote, as authentic on one level, he had to sort of look and act a lot like Pharaoh's magicians. They've got staffs that represent the power of God. Moses has a staff that represents the power of God. Except in all confrontations between Moses and the magicians lose as a way of emphasizing that the power of God is greater than the power of Egyptian deities.
You have that with the prophets as well. Because I remember when Billy Graham was in some country, they wanted him to perform an act like one of the prophets. And he says, I'm here to preach, I'm not a prophet. But I forget which prophet it was.
Good that he knows his limitations.
Who was it?
Well,
It's Elijah.
Elijah
It's
and Elisha.
Elijah.
Elijah and Elisha are the sort of the two prophetic miracle worker
Right,
prophets. None of the others.
but that's
really.
not sorcery.
It's not perceived as sorcery. It's perceived as an invocation of God to act.
So my problem is, you know where I'm gonna go with this. I've got these people today that heal. Now, basically, are they acting in the name of God, or are they basically just a common sorcerer? Even though they profess to be, that God's given this ability to heal.
Okay, I will say that they're not sorcerers, and they certainly profess to be an instrument of God. I just don't know that it works quite that way. So Jody and I were watching an episode of Young Sheldon recently, and the father in the household has a minor heart episode, and the pastor comes to visit, and says, "You want to sit down?" And he goes, "No, this is a short visit. I only came to pray over you." And the guy says, "Oh, okay." And so the pastor takes his hand and puts it on the guy's chest and prays for him to be healed. Okay. And I remember turning to Joe and going like, I've been in the pulpit a really, really long time. I have never laid my hand on a congregant. I've sometimes held a congregant's hand while engaging in prayer, but that's more about just creating a sense of connectedness, not because I thought there was some transference necessary or that my laying on of hands was somehow going to be efficacious. So I'm gonna suggest that in many examples, I don't think that one was, oh, I'm gonna lay my hand on you and you're gonna be healed, as much as I'm going to sort of direct the divine to the place where the boo-boo is.
Okay.
Not that I think the Holy One needs that kind of directional guidance. Like, if you can pop an aspirin that you digest in your stomach and it knows to get to the ouchie in your brain, I'm assuming the Kadosh Baruch Hu can figure out where the problem is.
Thank you.
Okay. From a biblical perspective, sorcery in any form was by definition considered ineffectual because all events are controlled by God. And any attempt to alter the future was considered heretical because you are now attempting to override the will of God. Right? The sorcerer's trade, while not completely understood by Ezekiel, is condemned and ridiculed. Let's see, I think I got his quote here. Yes. And say, thus says the Lord God, woe to the women who sew bands for all arms and make veils for the heads of people, every height to hunt souls. Will you hunt the souls of my people, and will you save your own souls alive? And will you profane me among my people for handfuls of barley and for pieces of bread, to slay the souls that should not die, and to save the souls alive that should not live, by your lying to my people who hear your lies? Right? Ezekiel was not a fan of that kind of magic behavior. Now, I will say that Ezekiel's need to ridicule it and the repeated bans on it in the Torah suggest that it was probably widely practiced, right? If you remember the story of King Saul, who attempts to wipe out all of the diviners and sorcerers and things like that that permeate the land of Israel. And then, okay, like I know we got rid of all of them, but come on, guys, tell me, who do we leave? Oh, well, there's this witch in Endor. Okay, and what is he? He goes to see her in order to consult with the spirit of Samuel. Right? So they're there, all right? And the persistent negation of them is a reflection of how much there they are. Divination, slightly different, is the science of reading omens, and it's predicated on the assumption that events are predictable, that the advance notice of what is coming is imprinted in natural phenomena that can be determined by human devices. In other words, I can predict what's going to happen. I can't change it, but I can know what's going to happen by using these various techniques. And the Torah or the Tanakh mentions several of them. There's sortilege, which is the casting of lots, right? Don't think Haman, they'll think a little bit Haman, because he's trying to choose a Mazeldik day for him to erase the Jewish people. And But think also the story of Jonah, where the sailors draw lots to try to figure out who's responsible, who's to blame for the storm that is buffeting them. It's like, this didn't just happen. This is not just, an inconvenient weather pattern. This is divine in origin, and it feels like it's a punishment. So whose fault is it? And it falls on Jonah. And that's how they come to toss him overboard. Okay. You also have hydromancy and oleomancy, where you try to interpret patterns in water or oil in a cup. There's this one's fun. Hepatoscopy, which means you inspect the shape of the liver of sacrificial animals.
I was gonna say liver because.
The entrails.
Yeah, entrails was not one mentioned in the Tanakh, but yes, but there was definitely something that was done. We have an example in the book of Kings where the northern king of Israel consults with prophets, asking them to perform acts of divination before going to battle with the Arameans in order to determine whether they will succeed or fail. All right. In the ancient Near East, divination was widely practiced before battles as a way of ascertaining the will of the gods. It wasn't perceived as something that you could change, but it was something that you could divine in advance, right? Hammurabi, in one of the texts we have, sends his Baru diviner to gather omens before attacking King Shabazum, right? The Hittites used stars and birds in their divination. The Greeks, we know, consulted diviners and oracles before military expeditions. There's a whole bunch of examples throughout the Iliad of such. And in fact, divination in some ways was tolerated within Israel because theoretically it wasn't incompatible with monotheism, because the diviner could at least say, I'm trying to disclose what God's immutable will is. I'm not trying to engage in sorcery and change what's going to happen. I'm just trying to get a preview of what God's planning. And in fact, in the book of Samuel, it seems that the prophet, before he was called a prophet, was called a diviner. Because the prophet told you what was on God's mind and what was coming down the pike. Okay.
So is that in terms of predictions similar to what we say about history? History repeats itself, or statistics, or we say
No, we all know statistics are just lies
or
or damn lies.
or posters.
No, they're just wrong.
I mean, that same idea of, we're going to predict the future based on whatever, how many people we talk to today and who they are and this, that, the other,
That's different.
And that's why it's probably still accepted. I mean, as opposed to sorcery where you're trying to
Well,
change reality.
Well, because on the one hand, okay, so let's stick with pollsters for a second, right? What they're trying to do is talk to enough people in July to try to ascertain how they're going to
Right.
vote in November.
True.
Right. So it's not so much a prediction as much as trying to gain information
Here's where we are today.
in the present,
Yeah.
that maybe illustrates to me what or shows me what's going to happen in 6 months.
Right.
The difference is that it doesn't. Well, it's built in. They're built-in flaws. Like, who knows what's going to happen between now and November? mean, sitting here last week, nobody could have predicted what happened on Saturday. So.
Yep.
Yeah, there's that, plus it's also predicated on the responders, A, being truthful, and B, actually going to do what they said they were gonna do in July, in November, because many people in this country do not actually go vote. This is a huge problem, but I mean, what was it in the last presidential election? It was like something around 58%.
Which is pretty high.
No, I'm looking at it going like, oh, that sucketh. 58% of eligible voters, 42% of eligible voters couldn't be bothered.
I've heard that statistic though in much more previous,
I'm not saying it's a
10, 20
new
years.
phenomenon. I'm just saying that it's a frighteningly
Very sad.
disturbing phenomenon,
Right.
because you would think that asking people, okay, you don't want to show up every time there's a board of governors for your local library election. I might give you a pass on that one. But to show up once every 4 years to vote for president and, down ballot stuff, yeah, I find. And maybe it's because I was a poli-sci kind of person and whatever, that just
I
like,
mean, I agree.
bothers
that
the
we all
bejeebers
should
out of me.
vote, but
What percentage in Canada?
I'm not sure. It's higher, but it's not nearly as high as I would like it. I think I've told you about, have I ever mentioned the cantor in my congregation previously? He's from Brazil. In Brazil, you have to, it's illegal not to vote.
Yeah.
So every time there was an election, he would have to go from Albany to the consulate in New York to vote.
I see.
I want to go back to, away from the stat for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. And you smile with this one. You're a rabbi.
I
Do
am.
some people,
We're not.
well, I thought I'd tell you that, in case you didn't know. Do some people just assume that you have certain powers because you were a rabbi? And so therefore, before they went to war, let's say, they came to the rabbi and said, I need your blessing, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. Absolutely, there's a presumption that I have the divine ear in a way that others do not. And part of it is, the residual of the way certain Hasidic rabbis were thought to have potency and power. People went to the Rebbe to get the Rebbe's blessing, and if the Rebbe said do X, you did X. There was no questioning that person existed in a more rarefied atmosphere closer to God than us ordinary folk. People don't actually like when I disabuse them of that. But why should the Kadosh Baruch Hu listen to me praying on behalf of you as opposed to listening to you pray on behalf of you? Other than for people for whom prayer is not a frequent activity, there's no vocabulary. And my saying to them, you don't need a vocabulary. It's prayer, ultimate prayer is what emanates from the heart that pours itself out before God. That's prayer. When the rabbis say, you take your heart in your hand when you go into prayer, it's because that's what matters more so than whether you've memorized the Siddur or not.
The reason I asked the question is performing of magic or predicting the future. Does it give you a little bit more stature and credibility So in other words, if you said it's gonna rain on Thursday, probably because you watched the weather report from last night, and it does rain on Thursday, does all of a sudden people think, oh my gosh, he has this ability to predict, or the fact that you came in and you performed some magic act, kind of like how magicians do that whole thing with sparks and fires immediately. So in those ancient days, did sorcerers, or that other big word which I can't pronounce, give a sense of credibility?
Yes, it absolutely gave them a credibility. You know, look, why did witch doctors have authority in their communities? Why did magicians and soothsayers, right? People imparted to them a certain capability, but only if they manifested a track record that sort of propped up their image, if you will. Look, and even prophets worry about that. You know, think what does Jonah say to God? Why does Jonah not want to go to Nineveh?
Because they might repent.
They might repent. You'll change your mind, and I'm going to look like the other character in this story.
And also they'll repent. But in the future, apparently Jonah knows that they will be the same people that will carry off.
That's midrash. Yeah. I want to no. I want to stick to the story.
Yeah,
I want to
okay.
stick to the story. I mean,
Okay.
Jonah. That's the rabbis trying to get Jonah off the hook a little bit, right? Jonah's already been down this road once. He has told another place that God was going to destroy them, and they repent, and God forgives them. And Jonah's going like, oh, no. I'm not going to become a laughing stock again. So he tries to run away. And by the way, Jonah is right. Because the people of Nineveh hear the message, repent, God forgives them, and cancels the destruction order. Right? Now, the people, you know, when this gets reported, it's not going to be, oh, we heeded Jonah's message, repented, and God chose to forgive us. It's going to be, Jonah was wrong again. That's the headline. Right? So you need to have a certain amount of accuracy in order to establish yourself. So Bilam has street cred, apparently, because he has been successful in invoking curses and doing other acts of sorcery. Bill.
Rabbi, what about the story of Joseph? He predicts dreams. Does that make him evil or good or?
Very good question.
Okay, remember what I just said about divination. Divination was at least tolerable because you're not trying to change what God is going to do. You're really saying God has decreed that there will be 7 fat years followed by 7 lean years. He's predicting his rise even at a point in history where that seems unlikely. Right? So trying to discern what God's going to do was at least tolerated within a monotheistic Israelite society. It's when you try to go against what God wants that you get into trouble. Look at the end of the story of the spies. All right. God says, you guys are going to wander in the wilderness, and your children who you said were going to fall prey to the enemy are the ones who are going to enter the land and take possession of it. What do a bunch of Israelites do? Okay, Moses, we're ready to go to battle. And Moses says, no. God said, no, don't go. You're going to get your tuchuses kicked. No, we're ready. We're there. And they march off without Moses, without Aaron, without God. And what happens? They get their tuchuses kicked, right? Because the time to march was when God said, go. And when God says, okay, you don't want to go, fine. take a little detour for 38 years in the wilderness, and we'll reconvene here in another generation or so, and then we'll do Israelites enter the land of Israel 2.0. So the other thing that the Torah and the Tanakh emphasize is that the Israelites don't need divination because God has granted Israel a unique direct communication through the prophets or sometimes through dreams.
Sam, excuse me, can you take me home?
Yes.
Okay.
Atticus has a doctor appointment,
Oh, okay,
Appreciate that.
important.
and that trumps you.
I understand.
Bad word. Is this the whole thing? I'll get back for half a second. The whole thing about the sorcerers, etc. Is that sort of like saying there shall have no other gods before me? And that some people would think that these people performing magic are sort of like God.
It's not so much that there's that it presumes an ability to force the divine hand.
Okay.
And that's where I think they run afoul of this.
Okay, thank you.
There's one officially sanctioned method of divination within the Israelite community, and that's the Urim and Tumim, the stones that sat in the pocket of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, which you could use to get yes or no answers to a very specific question. Right? And that was what was used in part to divine God's will when it came to military matters and other things. But it was very specific. If just to steal ahead to the end of our story, when Balaam finally reaches Balak, he needs hilltops to overlook the Israelites, and he needs solitude to go off by himself and read the astronomical signs and other omens as part of his divination process. All right? He is in what some circles would have been called a clairvoyant. He seeks to read the divine will, not necessarily to affect it. It's just an aside to our aside. There's an inscription in Der Allah, which is in the Transjordan part of what would have been the land of Israel. Right? In it, Balaam is expressly called a chozeh, a seer, and outside of Israel would have been called a diviner. There are lists of birds in the inscription that suggest that he used the reading of bird innards as part of his reading the omens. Okay? Part of what we have here in our story is Balak seems to think Bilam is not just a diviner, but a sorcerer, someone who can affect the future by cursing the Israelites. Right? And as such, might have the power to determine the fate of the Israelites, and by extension, the fate of the Moabites in their ability to defeat Israel. Okay? There are stories from the pre-Islamic Arab world wherein they would commission a sha'ir, a poet, who was reputed to be inspired by a jinn, a spirit, or a shaitan, to compose a hijah, a curse of the enemy. So this practice is both widespread and persistent. It just manifests in different ways, including there's an example from the Battle of Badr, wherein Muhammad had a poet curse his opponents before the battle begins. And so it persists for a very long time. Right? And sometimes the curses were even concretized in the form of an arrow shot from a bow in the direction of the enemy, even though there was no chance that it would actually ever hit them. Or something might have been thrown down as a way of showing the downfall of the enemy. Okay, so this is sort of the framework within which all of this is operating. Balak is reaching out to Bilam in order to have him perform an act of sorcery, which will change the future, because he's operating from the presumption that sorcery is real, that magic is real, that the will of the gods can not only be divined by the right person, but by the right person change. Right? And part of what's happening in our little story here is the rejection of that idea completely. Bilam is told from the very beginning, you may not curse these people because they are blessed by me. Beginning, middle, end of the story, incontrovertible, irreversible, unchangeable, immutable, whatever word you want, not gonna happen. Right? And Bilam, to his credit, I will say, at least in the initial, gives the party line. Right? I can't do anything God does not permit me to do. Whatever God says is what happens. All right. So we're left then, why does he ask the second set of dignitaries to spend the night? Why does he have to go back to consult with God? In part because it's the model, the paradigm of divination in the ancient world, where you would repeat and repeat and repeat the same thing over and over again until you got the result that you wanted.
Right.
Right? There are examples in various ancient texts. Let's see if I can find there. Here we go. Okay. There's a story from the Greeks. Xenophon, for example, sacrifices 3 times a day on 2 or 3 consecutive days, based on the hope that the outcome will be favorable to us. There's another example from the Arabian Peninsula, where a female soothsayer enabled her client to avoid fulfilling his vow to sacrifice his son by continuing to throw an oracle arrow until the point pointed at some animals instead of his son. Right? How many times this was repeated is not clear, but it's the idea that you do the same thing over and over and over and over again until you sort of get the outcome that you want, which makes sense of Balak's behavior. Balak's going like, oh, this didn't work. Well, let's move over here. Maybe this perspective will have a better impact.
But why is it Balaam?
Well,
I know he's human, and
well, I'm going to suggest that
I'm going to suggest that he kind of gave in and started believing the lie.
it partly depends on whether how you want to characterize Bilam.
Yeah,
Right? You know, on one level, he in rabbinic literature, he's the villain. He's the bad guy. And so therefore, yes, he wants to keep going through this,
right.
I'll call it farce, with the hope that he'll finally curse the Israelites and get paid off by Balak. Or, if we want to give him a little more credit, he actually sticks to his word. You know, what does he say to Balak when he arrives? Whatever God puts in my mouth, that's what I'm gonna say. And then he does it.
He does say it.
And the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, he's rewarded by getting an oracle directly from God without going through all of the ritual stuff that he normally does.
He's rewarded.
I would consider direct communication from God to be a reward.
Okay. Sometimes it may not feel like a reward.
Well, but in this case, it really does. And part of it is Bilam is also getting the idea that, oh, saying what God wants gets divine approbation and a pat on the back from the Holy One. This is good, right? So perhaps part of it is Bilam comes to understand what's the real reward. Is the real reward silver and gold from Balak, or is the real reward fulfilling the divine mandate and I'll call it getting in good with the Holy One?
I'm too I'm thinking about all the political ads and fake news that comes out with over and over again, where someone tells an obvious lie, the Pizzagate with years ago, or the this or that, where it's out there so continuously that it's designed to change the future, right? Or to control the future. And some of it is just plain out like white lies. We call it political ads, whatever you want to call it, but it seems like it's the same issue. It's
If you hear it often enough, you hear the lie often enough, you
hear
begin to
people lie
believe it.
over
So
and over
therefore,
again.
there is this caravan of people who are coming across the border. There's a caravan, there's a caravan.
Yeah, so
And
I'm
yeah, you believe that after a while, there's 18,000 as opposed to 14,000. None of them went through a turnstile. So how do they come up with the
Yeah.
18,000?
That's just the thought I had with
Oh, you're
regards to
right.
Balaam, who, at first says, no, we can't do this. And I do agree, does finally bless Israel. But it's almost like he's someone's moving his mouth kind of thing.
Well,
He has no choice.
well, but he acknowledges the lack of choice. The prophet is the mouthpiece of God. That's part of the job description.
Okay.
That might even be the totality of the job description, because not every prophet operates on the other side of saying, just a minute, Mr. God, no, you can't do that. Moshe does it all the time. Right, so and Moshe is the sort of the paradigm of prophets. And Abraham does it, on that one very famous occasion. But by and large, the prophets are conduit for the divine message.
I agree. And the age of prophecy is over.
Long been over.
Right. And so today you can't say, okay, that situation applies, to our ethics or the way we perform and live and so forth, because I can write this commercial, I can write this political ad, and it's just I'm just stating my view of reality, and
Well, the other one here, if I go for a second, is you bought stock A. And you bought stock A because you looked at it for the last 10 years. But if you buy stock A, down the bottom is a caveat, past performance may not be an indicator of future performance. And therefore, it is, when you go back to this ancient days, I don't know what tomorrow is, but I'd love to know. So therefore, can you tell me what tomorrow is going to be? And I'm going to bet on this game because of the past history. And I'm going to whoa, wait a minute, what happened all of a sudden? This team on paper should have won, and by the computer, they should have won.
Right, that's why they play them on the field and not just.
Right. So this is from ancient times. I think people really want to know about tomorrow and the tomorrows after that, because I can plan accordingly.
No doubt. I don't doubt that a bit. I'm
Oh,
just
yeah, I
saying
know,
that
everybody,
we've
yeah.
come a ways since the age of prophecy has ended. And so if we try to read in as if we are living in that time to this time and not miss the underlying message about who, who's in charge in terms of reality.
Well,
Reality exists.
Where I was
So,
going, the reason I did what I did, Sam, is because I don't think it's just in the past. I think people today still want the prophecy, and therefore that's why I paid $5,000 to this financial guru who's going to tell me whether I should buy stock.
I get it, and I don't agree. Yeah, I don't like
know,
that.
I don't
yeah,
think somebody's
and there's a
doing it
difference
wrong.
between prophecy and I'll call it prediction.
Yeah, that was my word.
You know, today, like, why do we still read Isaiah? Right? Because the prophetic vision of the prophets, Isaiah, Hosea, pick whichever one you want, practically. It's all about a society that strives to live within the parameters established by God in order to create the most just and equitable society possible.
But sometimes, there's warnings from the prophets that says you haven't been living like
Right.
that. You've
Yes,
been
the
living like
prophet-
this, and here's the
And here are the
here's the
consequences.
consequences.
Right.
And
But-
of course, it's
But those tend to be more you can either read them as rooted in the moment, because very often the prophets are talking about a immediate phenomenon. You know, when Jeremiah is talking about the destruction of the temple, he's talking about the one up the street from where he is. That the Babylonians are about to come and destroy because God's allowing it because the people are behaving sinfully. That's prophetic, but it comes true, and it's like, okay, it becomes a paradigm potentially to say, if in fact we choose to reject the positive message of Isaiah and try to build that, then in fact we are heading down a path in which this will repeat itself. Right? And that the first temple is destroyed, the second temple is destroyed. The rabbis discern different reasons for them. The first one was more a betrayal of ritual and to some degree of social justice.
ethics, yeah.
Right? The second one was about the internecine conflict within the society and the hatreds and the animus that built up within the society that pulled it apart and did not allow it to
Adhere.
fight off
Right.
the external forces.
Together.
And yes, does that resonate and scare the bejeebers out of me? Oh boy, does it ever.
Anyway, this is
You know,
good.
so
Yeah.
so the reality is, yeah, it's history, but we have to understand it fully in its own context if we want to then see how does this, or what, if anything, does this teach me about my own lived reality and experience?
And there is something to teach because Torah doesn't waste any words.
It sure does not. Look, who gets the best lines in this whole parsha? Well, not at least in chapter 22. It's the Shiash, and it's like, Bilam is off his mind with anger, and she's going like, have I ever behaved this way before? And you, Bilam, I mean, the ironies are so layered, right? A, you're supposed to be a seer. I see the angel standing there with the sword drawn, and you don't. You're not seeing what's right in front of you. You're not getting the picture, right? So even as Bilam claims prophetic vision and insight, he's blind. He doesn't even have the basic skill set or vision of this bottom of the line animal, right? Who saves him on 3 occasions, right? By the way, if I'm acting out of character, you're a diviner, you're a clairvoyant, you're a seer. Odd behavior by animals is a manifestation. You should be paying attention. You should have figured out, oh, my donkey, my she-ass never does this. I've been riding this thing for 20 years. Doesn't go off into the field chasing a butterfly, doesn't suddenly stop in the middle, doesn't do this. So instead of smacking the heck out of it, why doesn't he sort of go,
Wake up.
there's something strange going on here. He's blithely unaware, right? And then he comes up with this great line. If I had a sword right now, I would, and it's like the angel standing there. You want to borrow mine? Oh, wait, no, this one's for you. Okay. So it's a great little
I love it.
thing, but it probably is 2 stories fused together, because in version A, the God doesn't get, they come, God gives permission, and Balak is the one who looks like the she-ass in the whole thing, because he doesn't get the fact that Balaam is saying only what God says, only what God says. Oh, I keep telling you, I can only say what God says. You can have me do this as many times as you want, but it's still going to be only what God says. All right. But this other little intrusion sort of gives us a whole other perspective and a rejection of some of the magics of that era. And right. And God, Bilam on his own accord decides to go. Someone came to hire me. I'm off. And God's going, no, 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 no. Not so fast, young man. And it sets up this whole other story by which the prophet, quote unquote, the seer, has to learn to see.
Right.
What's the background of this story? One of the things I like about you when you do Torah discussion is you talk about a lot of the Near Eastern religions, Near Eastern culture. And so, and if I look at folklore of the Old Testament, the same stories are found elsewhere in other cultures. Is this story sort of like a narrative of the time, like Davy Crockett, or is this sort of like something that just came from other cultures?
I would say that this probably would have been a familiar folk narrative in the ancient world, where you have these talking animals, and these animals that save their riders or their hero from a conflict, from a danger.
Okay, thank you.
But overall, the bottom line is that God is these are my people. I mean, you can't, and this story.
You don't mess with the Israelites.
Yeah.
Well,
that seems to be the underlying theme, but it's, I mean, it's kind of humorous in some ways and
yeah, well,
sensational in others. And
teaching with humor is not a new thing.
As long as you get the point.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it takes Bilam a while to get the point. It's not clear whether Balak really gets the point, because
I don't think so.
he's being his worldview is being challenged.
Right. So do we think that
In the same way that Pharaoh, all right,
yeah,
for all
yeah,
that happens, it's a challenge to his worldview in which he is a demigod and all powerful. And at the end of the day, does he act any differently
no,
after this experience as before it?
Yeah.
And the answer is probably not.
no, because he got killed in the
Well, no, he survives. You know, he doesn't drown in the sea.
I thought he was at the head of his
He's only at the head till they go in the water. You know,
You go first.
it's like, right. You ever see the Batman movie with
Affleck or Clooney?
this was Was this
Michael Keaton?
Keaton? This was with Keaton, way back when, and Tommy Lee Jones plays Two-Face, and what's his name? The Michiganer guy plays the
Joker.
Riddler.
Joker. Oh, that, I can
Yeah,
think of
him.
his right now, yeah.
Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Oh, that's,
Yeah, him.
Jimmy,
James.
Carrey.
Jim Carrey. That's it. Okay, Jim Carrey. All
Very
right.
good.
And, they've invaded Wayne Manor, and Bruce Wayne is lying on the steps unconscious, and Two-Face is about to kill him. And the Riddler stops him and says, "Don't kill him. If you kill him, he won't learn nothing." Right? Pharaoh survives because if you kill him, he won't learn nothing. Now, in the reality is he probably doesn't learn anything anyway, but part of it is because it is very hard to give up your worldview, even when it has been kind of beaten and shattered completely.
That gets back to the, the free will thing, did God control his will? And I said,
Yeah.
no, human beings have a free will. We can act.
Well, what I liked is your other question earlier, which was sometimes people believe their own PR.
Yeah, I mean,
And they
well, I
get
don't believe
lost-
it, but
they
I
get
mean, you
lost in
see
this
it.
Wonderful world of PR. I go like, no, in the evening, let me tell you something, when you get home, you're just you again.
And sometimes you just don't want to question the familiar, the comfortable, the known.
Well, that I understand, but when it,
But
It gets to be,
it's the same thing on
ridiculous,
on a macro level.
yeah,
I may not question my belief in God, in Judaism, in whatever. Or I may not question my belief in fill in the blank. And oftentimes I will only look at things that reinforce that so that I don't have the dissonance that comes with questions. Or I can embrace the dissonance because Judaism encourages that.
encourages what now, Rabbi?
Questions.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
that's, first of all,
hope so.
that's certainly not true in certain faith traditions.
no,
I sat on a baking, it was just yesterday. And one of the things that the candidate said was she grew up in sort of a fundamentalist Christian household where questions were like, no, all right. And then she goes off and starts studying science. And it's all about the question and pushing the limits of the answers. And she's trying to apply this model and methodology to her religious tradition. And she's being shut down every which way possible. And not always nicely or politely. Right? That precipitated for her a crisis of faith. All right, and it left her lost for years. Because she, in her faith tradition in which she was raised and was, questions were not welcome.
so she gets cut off from her family or friends
Yeah.
or.
Yeah, it becomes a real problem. So
Yeah.
it's the rare person who's willing to do that as opposed to just, okay, we'll just push all the questions over here and lock them up. And I have this silo for science and I have this silo for religion and faith. And I just never, ever connect the silos.
Yeah, that is a tragedy. That is hard.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi.
You are
Thank you,
welcome
Rabbi.
as always.